I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
The calm before the storm, CJ, or maybe we are just in the eye of the storm right now. But if you thought James Duthie was worried on Friday about what his trade center on Monday is going to look like, I think by now, with a lot of pieces off the board, like a Claude Giroux, a Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Hagel, and those three were only dealt on Saturday. I'd be nervous if I was one James Duthie.
Plus, you got Ben Sherrod and Josh Manson earlier in the week, two of the other sort of bigger name deadline, obvious players that we're going to move because they don't have contracts. So it's looking a little bit bleak for Monday, I would say, although, there's going to be a surprise or two. It's not dead just yet. And I must say, as a point of just advanced apology, I'll probably be looking at my phone more during this episode than I typically would because we are still very much in the storm, even if, as we're recording on Sunday morning, there's been no action yet. Texts are already flying around, so I might have to keep looking down during this pod, Julian.
I am anticipating that at some point you are going to have to just full on get up and break a trade in the middle of this podcast. That is my expectation. You looking down at your phone, that I get that. You're a busy dude. My full expectation is that you will break a trade during however long we record this show.
I wouldn't be adverse to that. I think it'd be good for business. It'd be fun, but no promises. Like, certainly nothing on the line right now that I think is imminent. But as I say, there's a lot of chatter, and it's a fun time of year. I had a lot of fun Saturday. I don't know how you consumed it, what you were doing work-wise, but that was a pretty entertaining day of info and things happening. And I'm actually feeling pretty zen this trade deadline. Sometimes I'm stressed out by this point, but I'm feeling zen and ready to rock.
You've come down from whatever adrenaline came from all those trades. I mean, I don't even break trades, but that's what I feel whenever I see all that news just kind of popping up all at once.
Yeah. And obviously you're just trying to get every little piece of the details and bugging everyone, and, we're also bugging a lot of people for trades that haven't happened yet, but we know where the action is probably going to lie. And so some of those agents or GMs or assistant GMs of those teams are getting pestered by, Darren Dreger, Pierre LeBrun, and I, and, that's kind of the name of the game with this window to go before the deadline. And so, yeah, it's a fun time. Going to be tough to squeeze my run in today. Hope everything doesn't go chaos between the end of this pod and the end of the day, but it's going to be a good one.
Where's your run streak at?
So April 29th will be 2 years straight. So today is March 20th. I haven't gone today. So that's 12 days, 41. I am at 689 right now.
Very well done.
And I will hit 690 on Sunday. And I'm actually going to have to get up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. on trade deadline day to run before going to the studio to keep the streak going, because that's a long day in studio. And as I think I've mentioned earlier, Pierre LeBrun and I have some red wine in our future on the other side of deadline. So I got to get that run done early.
Well deserved. Last question before I get into some of the bigger trades that took place over the weekend. The Giroux trade, the Hampus Lindholm trade, the Brandon Hagel trade, and we'll get to some other pieces who have not been moved as of this recording, and we'll get to your hockey questions on Ask CJ. You mentioned the fact that there's been some talk with some agents. How many conversations have you had with one agent provocateur, a.k.a. Alan Walsh?
I haven't actually spoken down in the last little bit here. We kind of divide and conquer a little bit at TSN. I mean, I don't think that would surprise anyone. And so, the best way to stay on top of things is to divide situations, teams, agents amongst ourselves. And so, I've obviously talked to Alan in the last few weeks, but not in the last few days. And so I don't have really the latest on Marc-Andre Fleury. I know there was a report on Saturday about Minnesota potentially having interest. I do know that hasn't got to a stage where Marc-Andre Fleury actually has to consider whether he'd go there. I'm not certain he would go there. So I think that, some of that might be premature to say that's going to happen. But, the agent provocateur is not, I've not bugged them too much, but maybe I will once this episode's done.
I have a feeling you might. And we'll get to Marc-Andre Fleury later, but I want to bring up Claude Giroux first, who was the big fish that was expected to be moved ahead of Monday's deadline. He goes. from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Florida Panthers. And that was the only team he apparently wanted to go to. That was the only team he would move his no movement clause for. I got a TSN update on that on my phone that says you were the one who seemingly broke that trade. Is that true?
It's not, no. I think I had portions of it first, but Pierre LeBrun was the first to report that Claude was going to Florida. But, we're teammates, so we're not looking for individual credit that way. But, I'll say this. There's two ways of looking at Philadelphia's return here. One is that it's a little light given Claude Giroux's season, his career, his name value, all those things. But the second is the part you mentioned that's most important. They couldn't really have a true auction on the player. Colorado and Boston, among others, I think were interested in maybe getting into a bit of bidding war or really trying to put their best foot forward to get Claude Giroux. And because of his no movement clause, they didn't have that opportunity. And so it's really more like the Taylor Hall deal last year, where he had similar control over the situation with Buffalo. And if you remember, the Sabres got a second round pick back for Taylor Hall, which felt like a bit of a light return in the deal with Boston. And so, at least Philadelphia got a first round pick. It's not till 2024. It's top 10 protected. So it's going to be a long time before the player picked with that selection is ever really in contention to play, for the Flyers. I mean, basically the player picked with that pick right now is like 15 years old or 16 years old. But I think it'll be a valuable asset for the franchise down the road. Maybe it's something they'll be in a spot to trade, come then if they're trying to win at that point. So, you see this more in the NBA, and we're starting to see it in the NHL where picks way down the road are starting to get traded. The Leafs did that with the deal they made with Nick Ritchie and Ilya Lyubushkin. And there's a potential for a 2025 pick in that deal. And so we're seeing a bit more of this. And so I think under the circumstances, a little bit handcuffed, really only able to negotiate truly with one team. Chuck Fletcher did what he could for the Flyers. Great news, I think, for Claude Giroux. I mean, the Panthers already have a really deep forward group. This certainly helps. They made the deal for Ben Sherratt. This is a team that's got a chance to win a Stanley Cup. And, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Claude Giroux signs an extension there too, if it goes well, maybe to play another season or two there, because it's a great place to live and that team's got a bright future.
Is the conditions, the position of the team right now, are those the biggest reasons why Claude Giroux insisted on going to Florida? Because why else wouldn't he want to go to Colorado? I can understand the Rangers in Boston because of divisional alignments, but why not a team like Colorado? Why was Florida insisted upon?
I think that he saw a fit there in the lineup for himself as well, maybe a stylistic fit. Both teams do actually play pretty high octane offense. So, I mean, there's some similarities. I don't think it's so much not liking Colorado. I think that just, from a lifestyle standpoint, the team standpoint, staying in the Eastern Conference, the travel's not as onerous, all those types of things, I think put Florida ahead. And look, he's earned the right. I mean, essentially, this is his free agency of sorts, especially if he does end up signing an extension with the Panthers, but before actually becoming a free agent in July, this is his one opportunity to choose in his career where he's going to play. And so, I think some of his reasons are obvious, the competitive reasons, living in Florida, tax-free state, probably a great situation for his wife and kids. I think that's a positive, but even just, where he sees himself fitting in the Panthers lineup, all of the above made that make sense. And I don't think anyone should begrudge him for, pushing things, nudging things in that direction. We should mention too, the Flyers get Owen Tippett in the deal, 23-year-old player, former first-round pick, limited NHL experience, but I think on what's going to be a bit of a retooling Flyers team at minimum, we'll probably get more of an opportunity to play there. And so they do get some immediate help in addition to that future first rounder that we talked about.
By the way, speaking of first round picks, we did the episode last that was titled first round picks. There's a good chance this episode might even already be titled something to do with the first round pick again, because the Florida Panthers are all in, and over the next few years, they will not have a first round pick of their own to pick one. They don't have one for this year. They don't have one for next year. And they do not have one for the year after that. Like when you see that, like it clearly means this team is all in, right?
It does. And I think it also puts some pressure to sign Sherratt and Giroux, some degree of pressure. I mean, they're not under pressure today. If one or both of those trades don't work out, the players don't fit well, obviously there's no pressure to sign them, but you have given up a fair amount in those deals, and you don't have future first round picks because, I think the Panthers will be a really good team next year and will probably want to be adding at the deadline, and they're going to have to get creative to do that, and in 2024. So, they're all in on this season, but I do think because, Sherratt's not that old yet, even Giroux, he's having a good season, a little less than point a game. I think that you might see those players stick around, that those are rental trades in the moment they're made, but they're maybe not approached as rentals by the organization.
I should also mention too, I don't know if we mentioned already, there is salary retained for Cleo Giroux as well on the part of the Flyers.
Yeah, 50%. That helped make the deal go. I think the Flyers were worried about having to do one of those 3-team trades, that it might dilute even more what they're getting back. Because obviously if there was 50% retained by Philadelphia and another 50% retained by a team in the middle, Florida would have to pay that team. And so this made some sense. They got the dollars to fit. And, that's tough to do. Not every team could take on Claude Giroux's $8 million contract. And so, I was a little surprised actually a third team didn't need to be involved in that transaction. I still think we'll see at least one or more of those before Monday's deadline comes and goes. But the Flyers didn't really want to do that, and so that found a way to satisfy one of the things they needed out of this deal.
Do you see the Panthers getting active in light of Aaron Ekblad's injury? He, I believe it's a high ankle sprain that he suffered before the weekend, could be out for just a matter of weeks. It looked a lot more serious than it eventually ended up being. But do you anticipate that the Panthers are going to have to make another move defensively to just add to the depth while Aaron Ekblad recovers?
Well, I was told as a Saturday night they were still working on another deal. Now, I don't have any more info than that, so I don't know if it's directly tied to Ekblad or just them really pushing the chips in. But I don't think they're done just yet. They have a little bit of cap space, a small amount of wiggle room still remaining to make a deal. And so I think they're still going to look to make a deal, not to go completely off script, but I think Calgary's in a similar spot. They've made 2 trades, a Toffoli deal and also getting Kalle Järnkrok here in the weeks leading up to the deadline. I think they're still looking to add. And so there's a lot of pressure, it seems, or there's a lot of push, maybe a better way to put it, from those teams at the top of the standings to really not leave any stone unturned. And, it makes it kind of an interesting market. I mean, a lot of the action so far has been Atlantic Division teams adding, whether you're looking at Tampa, Boston with the Lindholm deal, or this deal by the Florida Panthers, plus the one other in the week with Sherratt.
We will get at some point to that one very obvious team in the Atlantic Division that hasn't.
Really is there one I didn't mention there?
There happens to be one that looks like a playoff team in that division that doesn't seemingly added anything, but I'll leave it to the viewers at home to determine who that team is. But I'll say this about
Steve Dangle is yelling in a basement about that team.
Yeah, geez, it's his basement. Yeah, it is his basement. Yeah, the big blue room that he has. I'll say this: like seeing the Giroux trade happen, seeing Ben Sherratt go to the Florida Panthers. Seeing all the movement going on, looking at how good they are. They have a Hart Trophy candidate in Jonathan Huberdeau. Got to say, that bet you made a couple months back, I'd be feeling pretty good about it. Feeling pretty good about it.
Absolutely. I mean, what's not to feel good about, my man?
That is very true. So that's the Florida Panthers. They could be active again before the deadline, 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday. I want to go to another team in the Atlantic Division that was very active, the Boston Bruins. There was like a fan, I forget who, I think mentioned in one of the comments in one of our videos, like, hey, when are you guys going to talk about the Boston Bruins? I think we got to start talking about the Boston Bruins, who added Hampus Lindholm from the Anaheim Ducks. That's a big deal. Him and Cody Curran going to Boston in exchange for John Moore, Urho Vakanainen. Got to make sure I get that right. A 2022 first-round pick, a 2023 second-round pick, 2024 second-round pick, and more retention of salary. The Ducks will retain 50% of that. We haven't talked about the Boston Bruins all that much this year. They've just been kind of laying in the cut a little bit. And now they end up getting a big piece off the defensive market for through trade. And I got to say, you already have to take them seriously. They're Boston, but this helps them for a playoff run.
Well, the Bruins have our attention now, right? And they were the runner-up in the Ben Sherratt deal. Like when that deal was going down, them and Florida went down to the wire. I think one of the reasons the Panthers ended up getting Ben Sherratt is that Boston wanted to talk to Sherratt about a contract extension prior to, pulling the trigger on the deal. They didn't want to trade for him just as a pure rental. And from Montreal's standpoint, of course, it's just easier and cleaner to make the deal to someone else and let them sort that out. And obviously Montreal got a 2023 first from Florida, which was one of the key things they wanted to get back. And so, the Bruins have been on the hunt for a left shot D. Hampus Lindholm certainly fits the bill. And, I don't think it'll be very long, perhaps by the time this pod's released, we're going to hear about the extension being done with Lindholm. The talk that I've heard is it's going to be an 8-year deal, maximum length. The AAV is going to come in around $6.5 million for Hampus Lindholm. So a serious deal, but I think it helps us, contextualize the package that was given up here. I mean, the fact that, a half salary was retained by Anaheim on Lindholm, and they took John Moore's contract, which, allows the Bruins, I think, still to be free to make other moves here before Monday's deadline, speaks to the fact there's 2 second rounders plus the first. But also, and Boston wasn't treating this as a rental deal either. Lindholm is a player that's a pending UFA, but as I say, I really fully expect him to sign that extension with the Bruins. He actually had talks with Anaheim about a similar type of extension, but they weren't willing to go past 5 years in those contract talks. So, the Bruins' willingness to give him a max length deal makes this make a lot of sense. And, we're seeing kind of the Bruins shifting because, this season and the here and now kind of feels a little bit like a last dance situation. Patrice Bergeron is having a monster year, by the way, despite his age, despite the amount of games he's played in his career. I mean, you look at his underlying numbers, it's outrageous. Like I think he's going to win the Selke Trophy again. He's basically, for the last 10 years, he's guaranteed to be a top 3 finalist for that award. Just an unbelievable career, but he might not play next season. It's fully in his hands. He's wanted to play out this year rather than think about next year and just see how he feels at the end of it. But, obviously that team's said farewell to Zdeno Chara in recent years. Tuukka Rask tried to make a comeback. It didn't last long. He's done with them. Bergeron could be the next one out the door. And so, they're under some heat here to give themselves the best chance, I think, to make a long playoff run. Another thing we're watching in Boston right now is I'm expecting Jake DeBrusk finally to have that trade request honored, prior to Monday's deadline. I think that's very much in the works. Like Lindholm coming to Boston, I think DeBrusk is willing to work out a contract extension with the acquiring team here. And so the Bruins are still going to be pretty active leading up to the deadline. And that Lindholm deal was a big one for Don Sweeney to get done on Saturday because it gave him time now to refocus his efforts on, making an addition for his top 6 on the wing and perhaps finding a new home for Jake DeBrusk.
Yeah, I have the Bruins in this same tier as a team like the Washington Capitals, a team that's been competitive for quite some time, but that window is just it's veering closer towards shut than open. Exactly. It's a shrinking window. So a move like acquiring Hampus Lindholm kind of helps prop that window open ever so slightly. I mean, you can't sleep on them. They're always going to play that Bruins tough way. And you mentioned some of those pieces that have departed in recent years. This is a team that still has that offense with guys like David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand doing their thing. Like, you can't sleep on the Bruins, no matter which team you who ends up facing them in the first round of the playoffs. Like, this is a team that you cannot ever sleep on.
Well, and no one's going to feel bad for these teams, but the Atlantic Division is going to have 4 teams probably in the top 8 overall in the league. So the way this divisional playoff format works, that's a brutal gauntlet for the first 2 rounds. Whether it's Florida or Tampa or Toronto or Boston that comes out of it. I mean, none of those teams, as good as they are, can feel all that confident. I mean, they can like what they have, but, it's a tough go. Like, Boston's probably going to get Florida in round 1. We'll see how the wild card situation plays out and all that. But, it's possible. I mean, I guess there's 2 ways you can look at it. Boston can finish 4th in the division and maybe get Florida, or maybe they climb up and pass the Leafs down the stretch and then they get Tampa. Like choose your poison here. Neither outcome is that great. All you can do is build the best team you can and just hope you're ready to go. And I'm with you. I wouldn't sleep on the Bruins. They just have so much experience. That first line truly makes a difference. Their blue line is getting better. Jeremy Swayman, a young goaltender, has been, having a solid season. And so, yeah, they could surprise someone, but it's going to be a tough division. And I think that's why you see those teams in particular loading up right now, because they all feel this pressure to just be able in a position to try to put their best foot forward once the playoffs start.
So we have the Bruins, who are not to be slept on. And then we have the Anaheim Ducks, who a lot of people thought were going to be active at the deadline, and it already looks like they have. I mean, they offload Josh Manson earlier in the week. Nick Delorier was also moved on Saturday, in addition to Hampus Lindholm. You put up a tweet on Saturday, just kind of detailing some of the pieces they've been able to acquire in the last little while. They get themselves a first-round pick for this year's draft, a second-round pick next year, actually 2 second-round picks next year, and a third next year, a 2024 second, Drew Hellison, that's in the Manson trade, Vakanainen, and more from the Lindholm trade as well. They got themselves some players, they got some bodies, and some draft picks over the last little while. Pat Verbeek has been busy.
He has, and remember, say someone like John Moore is probably going to be an asset for them to trade, maybe next season when he's getting towards the end of his deal. I mean, I think it's been good business. When you're selling good players and you're just selling, that's as easy as it gets. I mean, not to take anything away from Pat Verbeek, but it's easy to tear something down than build it up. And we've seen that in other situations around the league. Kyle Davidson made a great trade for Brandon Hagel in Chicago in terms of
we'll get to that
coverage. And I know we'll get to breaking that down, but it's going to be tougher to build that team up at some point. But credit where it's due. Pat Verbeek was pretty intentional. If he couldn't get contract extensions done, he was protecting his assets. He was going to turn them into assets, and it's a full-on fire sale there. And remember, the Ducks really are not that far out of the playoff picture. Like someone else might have viewed this differently, but Verbeek's a new GM. He's taking a long-term view. He's probably counting on being there 5 years minimum. Most GMs get 5 years, and so this year's, creeping into this year's playoffs just to get your butt kicked in round one, maybe by Colorado or whatever in a crossover, that isn't that appealing. I think you want to build up to have a sustainable run. And so, I would expect Rickard Rakell still to go out the door, prior to Monday's deadline. Doesn't sound like Ryan Getzlaf is going to go anywhere. I know there was some talk about him at last year's deadline. Montreal, Vegas had some interest in him, a couple other teams, but, he ended up choosing not to go then. I don't think there's any talk of that now. So, Rakell is probably the last piece we see moved. I know we've had Maxime Comtois' name out there in some rumors, but I'm not so certain that happens now. But, there's still one decent sized piece for, Verbeek to move. And we don't really have a robust forward market. Like now that Giroux's off the market, the next tier, I would include Rakell out of Anaheim, maybe Max Domi out of Columbus. I think teams are looking at Andrew Kopp as a possibility to move on from Winnipeg. Arturi Lehkonen has got a lot of interest out of Montreal. But you don't have a lot of what I would call difference-making forwards on this market beyond that. I mean, certainly there's depth players that'll slot into the bottom six on some teams that'll still trade places. But, Rakell's should be a decent piece for Verbeek to add to that haul that he's already started here in the last week.
Yeah, it seems like if you're a depth player, this is the deadline for you to be moved for a first-round pick. And there's no other player that exemplifies that more than Brandon Hagel, who moves from Chicago to the Tampa Bay Lightning. I just want to go through this trade here. Hagel and fourth-round picks from Chicago in 2022 and 2024 to Tampa for Taylor Radish, Boris Kachuk, and first-round picks in 2023 and 2024. Like that, it's one thing to offload one first round pick, which the Lightning have done in the past for a Blake Coleman or Barclay Goodrow. It's a whole other thing to unload 2 first round picks and prospects for a player on a really good contract. But again, a depth player like what you were describing before, doesn't that seem like a lot for a guy like Brandon Hagel, even if it is Tampa?
It's a lot, but it's a very Lightning trade. Sneaky good, I'd say. I mean, there's certainly risk baked into it. Like I'm not ignoring that fact, and I'm not, I'm still complimenting the Blackhawks on getting that return for Brandon Hagel. But for Tampa, they view themselves having about a 3-year cup window still. And lo and behold, Brandon Hagel signed this year plus 2 more at $1.5 million. Very cost-controlled contract, which is important for the Lightning. Like the reason Kachuk and Radish were in that deal, in addition to the fact that the Blackhawks can use them, their assets for them, is that they needed the money to exactly line up. Any money in had to be matched by money going out for a trade to fit under the Lightning's cap situation. I think the Lightning had about $17,000 clear in terms of, the adding up Kachuk and Radish's deals. It was $17,000 more than what they brought in for Hagel. So that's how narrow the margins were there. the first round picks, obviously the Lightning are banking on those being 28, 29, 30, maybe 32 if they win another cup in those years. And so they're really almost like second rounders in terms of where they're going to slot in the draft, at least as the Lightning are hoping. They did put top 10 protection on those two picks in case the bottom falls out. Maybe Vasilevsky could get injured one year. I mean, we've seen some crazy things, right? No one would have predicted Vegas being where they are right now, but sometimes the hockey gods or whatever, good fortune isn't on your side. Injuries crop in. And so they've protected themselves in the case they have a really off year out of nowhere. I think it's a reasonable bet that they're going to be a top team for the next couple seasons. It's a big gamble, but I think he fits their window perfectly. And we'll see what comes of it. But, you can understand on the other side of that trade, as much as you're like, why are you trading a 23-year-old on a cost control contract? I mean, even if you're in a rebuild, as the Blackhawks are entering, and Kyle Davidson's been very open about since being hired as the general manager recently, like, why would you trade that contract? Well, 2 first rounders is pretty appealing. Like, that's a good place to start your rebuild before you've ever gotten to Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, anyone else that they might move, not by Monday's deadline, but, come the summer, obviously there's going to be some bigger conversations there. I think that sort of jumpstarts what you're trying to do. And they didn't even retain salary. So it's sort of tidy business on both sides of the equation. A big swing by Julian Breezeball, but again, he didn't have the cap space to just get anybody. He needed something very, very specific. I think he identified it. He paid dearly for it, but that's what he did in the Goodrow and Coleman deals back when everyone was probably saying, why did he give up a first round pick for those guys? And he went 2 for 2 winning a Stanley Cup with those players on his roster. So I will defer to Julian Breezeball rather than criticize him for this payment.
Shout out the Staff and Graph podcast, by the way. You mentioned tidy business. I got myself one of those notebooks that says tidy business. So shout out Team Tidy Business, baby. Another point I wanted to make with regards to Brandon Hagel and Marc-Andre Fleury, who as of now is still a member of the Chicago team. I only caught this, honestly, like just before we started. I was busy covering the Canadiens and seeing the aftermath of the Cleo Giroux trade. Was there a move with those two players going out to the Maple Leafs? Can you help me make sense of that?
Yeah, well, the Leafs were the other team that was in really hard on Brandon Hagel for a lot of the same reasons as Tampa, because they need cost control players. They need, whether they're finding Michael Buntings in free agency, or if you could trade for someone like Brandon Hagel, who you got control of for a couple seasons at a good number, that deal made sense for the Leafs. But where it broke down, the Blackhawks had offered that the Leafs give up 2 first rounders, similar to Tampa. Also, Matthew Knies, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I should have checked, but he's one of the Leafs prospects they drafted last year. He played for Team USA in Beijing at the Olympics. He's actually someone the Leafs are hoping to bring into Toronto and play NHL games before the end of this season. They think that highly of him. In exchange, and also Peter Mrazek going out from Toronto, which Mrazek right now looks like a bit of a contract headache for the Leafs because he hasn't performed well, and he's under deal for 2 more years beyond this one for Hagel and Marc-Andre Fleury. So, pretty intriguing deal in a number of ways. I actually believe the Leafs were comfortable paying 2 first-round picks in a deal for Hagel, as the Lightning did. But, they didn't want to give up Knies. And, I don't know that they feel the push to need to address that goaltending spot as much as there's been talk in the marketplace. They like Eric Kallgren and Joseph Woll, who they've got as sort of 3rd and 4th options. Jack Campbell's injury isn't thought to be too serious, so he'll be back in the mix here soon. And so that one broke down. But, the Leafs were right in on Hagel having those discussions. And, it could have been an all-time type of deal in terms of just Leafs fan base. I mean, that would be a big trade, getting, a player like Hagel, giving up 2 first rounders and getting Marc-Andre Fleury in one fell swoop. But I think the futures aspect of that deal scared the Leafs off a little bit. The Leafs have been pretty clear. If they're going to trade a first round pick, it's going to be for a player like a Hagel, for someone who isn't a rental, who can help them over multiple years, multiple playoff runs. So that part of it fit, but they weren't prepared to give up the prospect at this point in time. And I don't think they believe they should commit the cap space to Fleury at a point where, they're still trying to upgrade their blue line, and I think are going to use their allotted free space on that position.
This show is brought to you by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you can get farm fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip all those trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. It's exactly why it's America's #1 meal kit. It has fit and wholesome recipes for satisfying and nutritious meals that you can feel good about, with 6 recipes per week to choose from, including low-calorie and carb-conscious options. Again, just saving on those trips to the grocery store is a big plus. You can warm yourself from the inside out with limited time recipes inspired by cozy classics from around the world, like beef tenderloin and cheese fondue, or miso, sesame, shrimp, and bacon ramen. They have a lot of good stuff from HelloFresh, which, again, saving on trips to go to the grocery store here. You should check out HelloFresh.com/Johnston16, and you can get up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. That sounds like a pretty good deal. HelloFresh.com/Johnston16. Gonna say that one last time here. HelloFresh.com/Johnston16 and use the code Johnston16 to get up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. That's from HelloFresh. For us to take an ad break here and talk about your balls. It's way more funny when Adam does these jokes. I don't know. Anyway, we're here to talk about the Ultra Premium Collection from Manscaped. You're going to take care of your balls. Yeah, nope, still not funny. Anyway, it's actually not for your private part, so I don't even know why I'm even really bringing up your balls. But anyway, it's a leveled up hygiene routine with your favorite manly scent. An all-in-one skin and hair care kit for the everyday man and covers you from head to toe. Literally. Manscaped is trusted below the waist. Now trust them with the rest. Join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off free shipping with the code Chris21. Also, you should write in the comment section that Chris should be doing some of these ads. But I'll tell you what, he's got some of these Manscaped products. I got some of these. Adam has some. I mean, of course, dude lives off Manscaped. Why do you think he has the nice, basement that he has with the studio? That's all Manscaped, baby. Chris21 is the promo code you got to use to take advantage of the the deal that they have. They'll kick you 20% off, but also the Ultra Premium Collection, which will give you some stuff that'll help you groom yourself, and not just with your balls, above the waist too. Chris21 at manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping. Okay, so this is a good transition into talking about some of the pieces who are still available as of this recording ahead of Monday's trade deadline. I get it. Some of the bigger fish have already been fried, but there are still quality names out there like a Marc-Andre Fleury, who we have been talking about ad nauseum for 2-3 months. Edmonton, Toronto, Washington, Vegas. I mean, maybe that's not even likely at all, but hey, Vegas is in need of some goaltending help. Robin Lehner is injured. Marc-Andre Fleury, let's start with him. What is the market at right now for him? What can you tell me about this player?
Well, I'm still not sure he's going to move, to be honest. And let's remember, he has sort of, we'll call it the gentleman's agreement from Chicago that he's going to get a say where he goes. As of this recording, nothing's been brought to him. Like even that Leafs deal, it never got to the point where Marc-Andre Fleury was included in it saying, hey, would you, are you comfortable going to the Leafs? So, there's the report about Minnesota being interested. Bill Guerin, the GM of the Wild, won a Stanley Cup with Marc-Andre Fleury once upon a time in Pittsburgh in 2009. Mm-hmm. I think there's at least some interest in exploring it from the Wild's end, but, that hasn't come to Fleury's decision. And so, I think it's entirely possible he remains a member of Chicago beyond Monday. If Vegas came, I would expect he would want to go back there. If Pittsburgh came out of nowhere, he wouldn't mind going home again to one of the 2 places he's played prior to this, I would suspect. But, that probably isn't in the cards because of his cap hit, because of a bunch of other circumstances behind the scenes, and so I'm not sure this player moves. There's obviously teams that like him, but there's complications with the deal. And look, he's got a young family. He's already won 3 Stanley Cups. I mean, I'm not sure he feels he has to go all in at this deadline, just go anywhere where a team might like him, because I do think he expects to play beyond the season and he'll be free to sign anywhere he wants come July as a free agent.
Okay. What about Jeff Petri of the Montreal Canadiens? That's a name that Kent Hughes kind of mentioned in his press conference earlier this week as a player who He acknowledged his family situation. They've gone back to the United States. They're not in Montreal right now, and that Kent would be willing to move him, but only if the deal made sense. What is your read on the Jeff Petri situation?
They don't have a deal that makes sense. I think it's very unlikely he's moved as well. Just big contract. Only so many teams in the market for that. There looked like there was something on the line there. Maybe if Dallas was in a position where they're trading John Klingberg, perhaps they would have got Petri in a secondary deal to sort of replace some of those minutes. That didn't come to pass. I don't think Klingberg's being moved by the Stars at this deadline. Perhaps that's just something we see revived in the summer. I think that the Canadiens really do want to do well by the player, but they have to do well in the trade. They have to make a trade that makes sense for their organization. And it just doesn't seem like all that's going to line up in time to see Jeff Petri get a new home at this deadline.
What about Jakob Chikren in Arizona?
Man, this one's a mystery. It's gone a little quiet, and some teams out there believe that Chikren is off the market, that, with the combination of his injury situation, remember, he's got 3 years on his deal beyond this one. So there's still plenty of time for Arizona to revisit it come the offseason. And when you're making a trade right now, like, first of all, if you're trading someone who's injured, even if it's a minor injury, that might take a couple teams out of the mix that just don't want to mess with that right now. You're also taking the teams that aren't contenders more or less out of the mix because, there's some teams that aren't trying to win the season that might like Jakob Chikren, but aren't going to make that deal in year. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for the Coyotes to probably view this as a draft trade or a summer trade. But I don't have any official confirmation from any Arizona sources that he is fully off the market. Some teams out there think he's off the market, but I haven't heard that from the Coyotes yet. And so there's still a little bit of gray around how this plays out. I think that that's a sign, quite honestly, Julian, that they're still listening to offers just in case, but they know in their back pocket if they don't move him at this deadline, it's certainly not the end of the world. And that's still a pretty appealing asset that they have to sell somewhere else. And so I'll say that Jakob Chikren, it's kind of boring, but it's the truth, might be moved, but I wouldn't be banking on it come Monday. Just, I think that injury situation does muddle the picture a little bit. And look, Boston was a team, for example, that's been quite interested in Jakob Chikren. Florida was a team interested earlier on in Jakob Chikren. They've each filled, the left shot D slots on their team. I think the LA Kings would still probably make that trade both now and for the future. But, the market of teams is shrinking. And so I think it's a harder deal for the Coyotes to hit the home run with the return that they're looking to hit.
Two more defensemen I want to bring up. Mark Giordano is one.
Yeah, we're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs with Giordano. He's, it's a place he's made it known he'd like to play. He has some control here with the trade clause. Toronto's his hometown. I think it makes a lot of sense. Where this hasn't happened is Seattle's wanted a first-round pick, and Kyle Dubas, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't want to pay a first-round pick for a rental. And so, I suppose someone else could swoop in. Carolina, I believe, has some interest in Giordano. The Rangers have been linked to him as well. This is a player, though, that's going to move by Monday's deadline. The Kraken are going to want to get some assets for him and do right by him. He's 38 years old. Clearly the number of chances he has to try to chase a Stanley Cup are becoming limited. I would still keep a strong eye on the Leafs here, though. Just, the fact he wants to play there, the fact he's played and had a lot of success with TJ Brody in the past, I think is a bonus for the Leafs. If the Leafs are bringing in a rental, there's some risk, but there's a little less risk when you know that there's built-in chemistry with a potential pairing, and the fact he's eager to come and play in Toronto. I think he'd probably even sign a reasonable extension to extend his time if it works out. So, there's a lot of smoke on that one, but there hasn't been an agreement in terms of both teams seeing eye to eye on what the return should be to make the trade happen.
Speaking of the Leafs, you tweeted about this player on Saturday night, Travis Dermott. Are we in the final moments of his tenure with the Toronto Maple Leafs?
It would be a surprise if we're not. And I think there's an acknowledgement here that, Dermott's been passed by two younger players on the Leafs depth chart in Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin this season. It's been a frequent healthy scratch of late. And it's kind of been in and out of the lineup. Like, his career probably hasn't trended in the direction most would have thought. At a certain point, the Leafs called him up when he was 20 or 21 years old, played him in a playoff series against Boston. By now you were expecting him to take a step and be an established part of the rotation. It hasn't happened. And so I think the Leafs want to do right by the player, especially at a time when they're looking at bringing in someone like Mark Giordano or maybe Calvin DeHaan or Robert Hagg. They're looking to add an experienced defenseman ahead of where Dermott would be on the depth chart. And so that would further limit his playing opportunities. So, I think that the organization is doing everything in its power to give him a fresh start, send him somewhere where they are willing to give him those minutes. And, they kind of a classy move, I thought, by putting him in the lineup for Saturday's game at Nashville, kind of gave him a send-off, it would seem. And judging by Dermott's comments to the reporters after Saturday's game, I think he understands the situation quite well. And, he's from Newmarket, not, just a little bit north of Toronto, kind of his hometown team. He said he's been living a dream since his draft day. And I do believe that he'll be moved on, not in an obvious deadline day trade, right? He's not a expiring contract as a UFA or anything like that. But, I think that they're going to want to give him a fresh start.
Okay. What about Nick Paul of the Ottawa Senators?
This is an interesting one because the Senators and Nick Paul's camp have engaged in contract talks right into the weekend here. And, the Senators have a 4-year deal on the table at $10 million. Nick Paul, I believe, wants to get $3 million annually on a deal to sign. Maybe he takes a little bit less. And so they are really quite close. If you look at that, relatively speaking, they're within a range you'd think a deal would get done, but they're also both playing a little bit of chicken with each other because, if they don't get to a spot where Nick Paul is going to sign that deal, I would think the Senators have to trade him. He's someone I believe Colorado's had some interest in. The Rangers have had interest in. The Edmonton Oilers are interested in Nick Paul. So, I think that there's an opportunity to trade him if they don't reach that deal. But I'm also seeing a player that I think deep down is happy to remain a Senator. I think he's someone that the organization likes. I know the coaching staff likes him. And so you almost feel like this deal should happen. But, emotion gets into a negotiation. Now there's a time element. There's a crunch to it. Maybe they don't get the contract signed. And so this is one of the ones I think that there could be some drama around how it goes down. And, I also think Nick Paul's willing to sign an extension if he does get dealt, as we saw, Jean-Gabriel Pageau signed an extension with the Islanders at last year's deadline when he got dealt by Ottawa. Mark Stone signed a big deal in Vegas after his trade. And so maybe this is just the latest Senator that couldn't reach a deal with Ottawa and immediately signed somewhere else upon being traded. But, this one has a, to be continued attached to it because, it's not entirely clear at this hour what direction it's headed in. And I think it could go both ways. I could see him sign the extension with Ottawa, or if it breaks down, later Sunday, he's probably getting, Sunday's actually turns out to be his birthday. He turns 27 on Sunday. Oh. Maybe, unfortunately, a birthday present is he's going to pack his bags and move somewhere else.
Imagine that, like you're minding your business, you're enjoying your birthday, and you get a phone call from your general manager being like, "Hey, we're shipping you to Nashville. Great birthday present." If
you had to get traded somewhere on your birthday, going to Nashville, at least for the fun side of things, you could do worse. Even the hockey side of things, a great place to play. The other part of this though is he's about to sign, a contract richer than he's ever had too. So there's a lot of different emotions, I would imagine, if you're Nick Paul, because you are going to get a new deal. I do think a team trading for him will likely try to sign him to that kind of deal. So you're getting security to the degree he's never had. But you also got to move from, I know he was drafted by Dallas once upon a time. He came to Ottawa on the Jason Spezza deal as a prospect way back when. But, the Senators are essentially the organization he spent his entire career with. I'm sure there's a lot of competing emotions there, but you got to look after yourself in business, my man. And so this is not the time for Nick Paul to take a discount. He's established himself, and he's going to get a nice deal here, I would think, too, as part of whoever this plays out.
I think we both know you got to look out for yourself in the game. You know that. I know that. You didn't just say that just to say that.
Well, you better get some Bitcoin in that contract, too. It shouldn't just be money, but, I'll leave that aside.
That too. Two more names. Artturi Lehkonen. You kind of briefly mentioned his name earlier on. Artturi Lehkonen of the Montreal Canadiens.
I could see him being moved because, as I mentioned, there's not a really robust forward group. Montreal's fielded a lot of calls on him. I think, where the Canadiens have got with Artturi Lehkonen, with Brett Kulak, like they've said with these players, okay, we're not just trading them for whatever we can get. It's if we meet certain thresholds. And I think with Lehkonen, they've wanted to get a first round pick. Now they might ease off of that. Maybe a second rounder gets it done, or there's a prospect out there that appeals to them. Maybe that satisfies the ask. But, if something is put in front of Ken Hughes, Jeff Gorton to think about with Lehkonen, they'll definitely pull the trigger. I think they recognize this is a good time to trade him. I think he's a player that holds a lot of appeal. His defensive metrics have consistently been strong throughout his career. Saw him score a pretty big goal in the playoffs last year for the Montreal Canadiens. So he gives you a little bit of offense, but I think more than anything, he's a playoff proven and trusted player because he doesn't give up a lot at the other end of the ice. And so, yeah, the Canadiens are in listen mode, but they don't feel they have to sell him. Much as Brett Kulak, I think sort of maybe an under the radar name that isn't getting a ton of discussion nationally. I know teams like Calgary, Edmonton have called on Kulak, have some interest in him. And I think those are the two most likely players still to be traded from Montreal if the prices get to where they are. And, I was predicting a buyer's market, Julian, a week ago. Just shows you the predictions aren't worth the paper they're printed on, because it's been a seller's market so far. We've seen a lot of high prices paid. And if that continues, I could see Lehkonen being sent out the door by the Canadiens.
I wrote a whole article about how, because of how quiet the market looked, it probably meant that they weren't going to get a sufficient offer for Artturi Lehkonen. It could still either work out that way, or the opposite might happen, where the prices end up being jacked too high, where teams just kind of balk and they don't really move Artturi Lehkonen. I'm with you on the whole predictions thing. It's a crapshoot. These things will make you look dumb if they end up being wrong, but they could make you look right. But Artturi Lehkonen, a lot to consider with this player ahead of Monday's deadline.
And remember, Montreal's done well. Like the Toffoli deal and the Sherratt deal, I think yielded pretty good returns. And so it does reduce some of the pressure where you don't feel like you have to sell absolutely everything if the market isn't there. And so I really do believe the market will dictate what happens with Lehkonen, with Kulak, perhaps some of the Canadiens' other players. And so it's a good spot, I would say, for Ken Hughes to be in, because he doesn't feel like he just has to trade them. Like if it's only a 5th round pick on the offer for Kulak, he's not going to be traded. It's that simple. And I think similarly for Lehkonen, if you're selling him for pennies on the dollar, they're going to keep him. They'll sign him as a restricted free agent, and perhaps they'll trade him at some point in the future.
One final name for you, JT Miller.
I don't think he's moving. It seems as though that ship has sailed a little bit. Obviously, the Canucks have a pretty clear idea what his value is out there, because there was a lot of interest in him. They talked to a lot of teams about him. If we're looking for a bigger name and bigger contract to move out of Vancouver, I think Connor Garland is more likely at this hour. The LA Kings have expressed some interest in Garland. I believe a few other teams are interested in him. He is at a controlled number for foreign change for the foreseeable future. And so, it's entirely possible that it's just some of the depth pieces that Jim Rutherford moves on from. Tyler Mott is getting a lot of interest. I think they'd like to move Travis Hamonic if they could. Maybe Luke Shen goes out the door, as much as they like his, what he brings from a value standpoint. He's a tradable asset. But if any of the sort of bigger forward names that have been rumored go, I think Garland's the most likely, then Besser, and JT Miller is 3 out of 3. And I really believe, at this point, it's not likely at all that JT Miller's traded.
Okay. We've gone through a lot of trade talk, and we technically have a little bit more with some of these questions that have been sent in, either through Discord on Twitter. We're doing a very special Ask CJ on this very special podcast. This Sunday episode will have questions from you all that are a little bit more trade or hockey focused. And on Tuesday's episode, we're going to try to make the questions a lot more fun. So because a lot of people have asked like really fun, weird questions that I can't wait to get to, but we'll get to them on the Tuesday edition, which again is another special episode of the CJ Show. There's a pretty obvious reason why we're not going to do an episode on our usual Monday. And it has very much to do with why CJ is looking at his phone right now. But don't worry.
I'm just double checking. It's been like 40 minutes of recording here. I just got to catch up on these messages.
And that's not to shame you, my brother. You have a job to do. We are very happy.
This is important, guys. This is important.
This is very important. I'm surprised you don't have 2 phones, unless this is what you're. Yeah, actually, no, you do have 2 phones. Or maybe you have more phones. I'm not going to get into how many phones you have. Ask CJ is the segment that we normally do every Monday, where we take in questions off Twitter and Discord. Some of them get answered in the Inside the NHL column that CJ does for the Toronto Star. Big shout out to North Star Gaming and North Star Bets, by the way. That is the home team for CJ. But we can also get into some of these questions here on the CJ Show, such as one. Actually, before I get to some of the ones from Discord and Twitter, I have a question for you, CJ.
All right.
How does a trade call work? Like, are we gone through the days of teams just sending in like a fax or something? Like, how does that work? Like, can you explain that process?
We've actually advanced beyond faxes. There were trades in the past that broke down because of fax related issues, believe it or not.
Ridiculous.
because timing is of the essence, right? Like 3:00 Eastern time literally is an actual legally enforced deadline. So the trades have to be agreed to before 3:00 Eastern. The reason you get so many trades announced after 3:00 Eastern is there's a whole process. And basically, as it's been explained to me, it goes like so. You and I, Julian, reach a trade. You represent one team, I represent another. We send in an email to the league's central registry saying we have this trade with the details in sort of an email. And then the trade call is set up. And in typical times, like if you're making a trade not at the deadline, there's about 3 people that work for central registry that one of those 3 people will typically handle that trade call. Now they bring in some extra artillery on deadline day because sometimes we see 20, 30 trades made. And these trades take time to go through on the call. And so eventually, basically teams are then placed in a queue, especially when a whole bunch flood in right at 252, 253, 258. And you get on with someone from the league, one representative from each team. I don't think it's usually the general manager. Usually it's, say, your cap expert or your assistant GM, maybe director of legal affairs, what have you. And the league does what's called a systems check. And essentially they go through and they make sure, each team can only have 50 contracts, for example. So they make sure if you're adding players that you have a contract slot for them. They look at your cap picture. They make sure that all the numbers will add up and you'll still be cap compliant afterwards. If you're trading a draft pick, they make sure you haven't traded that draft pick in another trade. Because obviously, mistakes can happen. I think a lot of things people probably don't realize, especially at the deadline. Like, I think sometimes these things are pretty scrambly as you're just filling in some of the details and mistakes can be made. And so that trade call happens where you make sure that you're trading assets that you have, that you can fit in the asset you have. Both teams verbally are agreeing to what's stated so that you're not talking, hey, I thought it was a 3rd rounder in 2023. I thought it was a 3rd rounder in 2024. Like, that's where all that would get ironed out. And then a trade is made official and released. And of course, it's my job and Darren Drager's job and Pierre LeBrun's job to try to get those details out before it's officially done, which comes with some risk because, occasionally I think something can change or be tweaked at that stage. But, it takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, typically, depending on how complicated the deal is. And as I say, there's only so many people on the league end to handle those calls. And so if we get the deadline day on Monday and there's a trade announced at 4:04 p.m. and you're like, wait a minute, the deadline was an hour ago. That's because there was a backlog at the trade call end. And that's basically how it works. Someone's got to certify that the trade is actually legal before it's 100% complete. And there have been, again, in the past, trades have broken down at that stage for a number of reasons. In the old days, it's because a fax didn't get in on time or someone didn't read it properly. And in this time, it can be because there's misunderstanding about what the actual deal itself is.
I also wonder if any deals have been broken down because of like the lines being too busy. You said that there was extra reinforcements added for those lines, but what if it's just like the queue was just so long, like you can't get anybody?
Well, I think that's why you send the initial email, because the initial email is saying, we Toronto and we Chicago have this deal at 2:58 Eastern time on, Monday, March 21st. And so that's record that you've verbally agreed to the deal or you've agreed to the deal pending the trade call. And then the trade call is set up. And so that's how you can get in under the wire, but you might still wait 45 minutes until you can get on the phone with the league, depending on how busy things are at that moment. And so that's a lot of what's happening. So you'll see James Duthie, if you're watching Trade Center, which you should be watching Trade Center on Monday, there'll be like a dinging of the bell, 3:00, but that doesn't mean all the action will be in because there'll be teams that have lined up to have those trade calls and get everything confirmed.
So basically, if you have an email or some kind of call in before 3:00, you are good.
Yes. And once you get to 3:00, even if you got something on the line, tough go. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago when Erik Karlsson wasn't dealt at the deadline, I believe Vegas and Ottawa were literally talking about a potential deal at like 2:58, 2:59.
Jesus.
And obviously any deal, and the deal ultimately that happened the next offseason with Erik going to San Jose ended up being quite complicated. I mean, that's a complicated deal. That's not just like warm body for a 6th round pick. I mean, you're talking about potentially salary retention and multiple draft picks and conditions. Conditions on the trades can be complicated sometimes, especially when it comes to draft picks. And so, it's a lot going on sometimes in those teams' war rooms at the deadline. And I think that's why you feel a little better if you're in Brad Treliving's shoes right now, or, even Don Sweeney, Julian Brisebois, the GMs that have made their deals early and, they might still be kicking tires on other things, but they don't feel that urgency to have to do it. I think that's probably a preferable position to be in, because it can get pretty hairy from what I understand in that last hour before the deadline if you're really trying to make something happen.
I am fully appreciative of that crash course on how a trade call works. I feel 500% smarter. Genuinely do, because now I know if a team is trying to get that trade in, it's because they got that email in just before 3. So that is a big, I've always wondered for years why there was that backlog of trades that end up, at 4:00, you hear that this player got moved.
Can I make a confession too?
Of course you can.
If I ever had another job, if I had to not be doing what I'm doing, I would love to be the person performing that systems check. I'm such a CVA nerd. I'd love to be digging into these trades before they're public, making sure that everything's legal and compliant. I love the minutia for me is so exciting because I'm a giant CVA nerd. So basically, if I could come back in another life, I want to be doing that job, because I think it'd be super cool to be in on the trades before everyone knows about them, to be combing through the details and making sure they're legal. I think that would be an awesome job. Or I guess maybe someone making the trades from the team side of things. But let's face it, no one's lined up to hire me to do those jobs. I would just love to do them.
You say that now, and then in 2-3 years, we hear oh, you've been hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs as their assistant general manager or something.
Who knows? I doubt it, but the universe works in weird ways. You never know.
Future capologist, Chris Johnston. People, it's Julian here with a message from Athletic Greens. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient and daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. Ugh, it's not a fun time. In just one scoop and a cup of water every day, that's it. That's literally it. That's amazing. No need for a million different other pills and supplements and all that extra stuff. Athletic Greens is it. To make it easy, Athletic Greens will give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your very first purchase. All you have to do, visit athleticgreens.com/Johnston. It's CJ's last name. How easy? It doesn't get any easier than that. athleticgreens.com/Johnston to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Let's get to Buzz GC's question from Discord. Normally I do the Twitter questions, then Discord questions. I decided to flip it for this time around.
We had a flood of Twitter questions, a flood.
Oh, yeah. Well, I tried to get
actually hundreds. I was combing through them I'm working on my Inside the NHL column, on Sunday here for Monday, and there's hundreds of questions. I've never seen that many. It was awesome.
It's quite a bit. A lot of them also did skew towards the criteria for Tuesday, but we did get a bunch that skewed towards the criteria for our Sunday episode. I wrote down a few, depending on how we're feeling. I may even add more. Let's get to this one to start from Buzz GC. Not a lot of talk about the Detroit Red Wings at the deadline, with reports of Steve Yzerman supposedly being open for business besides Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond. Do you think a big trade could come out of Detroit again this year?
I absolutely do. I think if there's one GM that could surprise us, I'm going to say Steve Yzerman, because that's not a leaky organization. You don't get a lot of rumors. Obviously, they're still in a spot where they're starting to build, right? They've got some good young players. But I think that there's a lot of reason for them to want to try to do something a little bit bigger or be creative. And so it would not surprise me if the surprising trade again came out of Detroit, if it was more of a player for player type of deal. That's not a guarantee. I don't have any real hard juice to give you on what player it might be, but I do think the Red Wings are kind of in stealth mode, trying to make something happen more than just selling, someone like Mark Stahl or Nick Leddy or Vlad Nemestikov, one of their free agents that they might send out the door as a seller. I think that they're looking to make more deals that will directly impact the roster immediately.
Steve Pans on Discord. No real discussion of the Frank Vetrano trade, which ended up being a big domino into all the trades that ended up happening later on after that. Any thoughts about it, and any other New York Rangers rumors?
Well, the Rangers are they're still looking for another forward after getting Vetrano, but they're trying to improve their depth there. We see someone who scored at a moderate amount during his career. And, really for Florida, it was just a cap maneuver. It was not a case of not liking the player, but it created the room to help bring in Sherrod and bring in Giroux at half price in each case. And so, I think it's moving the cap pieces around. The Rangers, by Monday, I still think they're getting another forward, whether that's someone like an Andrew Kopp, maybe an Arturi Lehkonen, maybe even a Max Domi. I think it's sort of Rickard Rakell, the players that are out there that can play in a top 6, top 9 role. I think the Rangers will go and get one of them because they've had a great year. Management wants to reward the team and give them the best chance to claw their way through the Metro Division playoffs. And so Vetrano was the appetizer to what I think will be a bigger deal from the Rangers.
Salamander on Discord. How can the Golden Knights possibly ice a team with all their stars before the playoffs? Checking their cap friendly page and just adding together all their biggest contracts. I can get to maybe 3 forward lines and D pairs before I run out of room. Do they have enough LTIR space, or is there legitimate cause for concern about how they can bring back Stone, Leonard et al. Back once they're healthy?
The simple answer is they can't. There's not a world where they can ice Stone and Eichel unless they get a bevy of other injuries at the same time during the regular season. And so, look, Vegas is in such a difficult spot. It really has been a star-crossed year. Like, they've had more injuries than it's more than a lot. To say they have a lot of injuries would be an understatement. And so from a cap perspective, they can't, if everybody got healthy, they wouldn't be able to activate everyone. I think that's a problem they'd love to have because, my information suggests they probably won't reach a situation where everyone is healthy before the end of the regular season. And so I'm not worried about their cap picture in terms of them getting to a spot where they can only have 3 healthy lines. I think because of the nature of some of the injuries that players on that team are dealing with, it's not going to be till, beyond the regular season when they can all be activated. And so they're just trying to find a way into the playoffs, get healthy as time goes on, make improvements there. I don't see them being a big player at the deadline because they only have so much room to add salary and really they don't have much room at all.
T Welcher 15 on Twitter. Missed on Sherratt and missed on Lindholm. What do the St. Louis Blues do now?
Great question. Maybe Mark Giordano is a solution for them. There are other lesser sort of headline quality names at lefty, whether it's Calvin DeHaan, Robert Haig. I think that there are players that can help. I also wonder about the Philadelphia Flyers and they have a couple of defensemen that have been out there in rumors, Ivan Provorov, Travis Sanheim. I'm not saying those deals will happen now, but, one thing Doug Armstrong's done, if you look at his history over the years, is not always traded for the rental players. I wonder if he tries to address a need at left defense from that group. And, I do think that they'll get something done. It just might not be the headline grabbers they want. They were definitely in on Sherratt, but they stepped aside when they saw where the price was going. It just was not what they were willing to pay. Boston paid a pretty big price for Lindholm as well. And so the Blues are kind of lurking out there. I would have them on my list of teams that are going to add a lefty, but they might have had to sort of realign their targets here to not be going for the big fish just because it became such a seller's market.
Sly Stew 2012 on Twitter. What do you think Colorado does now that Giroux is gone to Florida?
Keep an eye on Andrew Kopp. I'm not sure that Winnipeg's decided they have to sell him. The Jets have hung in this playoff race, but they also saw what Cal Yarncroc went for, right? 2nd and a 3rd round pick to Calgary plus a 7th because salary was retained. It's a pretty good return. And so if Winnipeg can get something similar, I could see Kopp being moved by Monday. As it stands on Sunday, I do think he's going to play in Winnipeg's game. So it's a sign they haven't got an offer where they're even in an asset protection mode. But I do think the Avalanche are a team that have him on the radar. They're going to go get another forward. I would be stunned if they didn't. And so I'm gonna refer you to the same names that I've said in a couple spots. They're choosing between the likes of Rakell, Kopp, Domi, or maybe even Arturi Lehkonen. I think that's where we look for Colorado, and I think they've left their options open in terms of keeping tabs on all those types of players.
Yeti1181 on Twitter. Will Kyle Dubas pull off something that will shock us?
I don't think he's going to shock you. I think you've heard the names the Leafs have been in on, whether it's Giordano, maybe a cheaper option, Jacob Middleton out of San Jose. I think Robert Haig, someone they've kept an eye on in Buffalo. plays sort of a more rugged style, could be a bottom pairing defenseman for them. I don't see anything shocking coming from Toronto. I don't see them trading a big name roster player. We already discussed Travis Dermott being moved on for really compassionate reasons to give him a fresh start, but not, much more than that. And so, I think the Leafs will have a more predictable deadline, but, look for them to add a depth defenseman and a depth forward at this deadline. So, Kyle will be busy, but I don't think you're going to see anything that just rips your face off, shocks you, causes Steve Dangle to go into hyperbaric shock. He's so stunned by what happens. I think it's going to be a pretty predictable deadline for the Leafs. And, the prices are part of that. The Leafs want to be mindful of that. They don't want to go all in. They're going to need a next wave of players, right? They need a few guys to come up on entry-level deals and be ready to play. And so they're not just emptying the cupboard of prospects or picks, to get in on the big names right now.
As you were answering that question, a primal scream from Steve Dangle just popped into my head. Just him on his knees, just yelling and screaming to the heavens about Kyle Dubas not getting the big fish at the deadline. I just anticipate that, I guess. Oh, well. Anyway, from Jigme. Hi, Chris. It's Jigme from the Jigme K Show. It's great to chat with you here now. Do you sense that the Leafs have defenseman Mark Giordano as their first priority, then another depth defenseman, and then followed by a fourth line forward? Thanks for answering.
He's probably he's among their top priorities now. I mean, I think in a perfect world, they would have been in on Hampus Lindholm, but ultimately they weren't going to pay that price. They weren't going to give him an 8-year deal like Boston's going to. They're just not in a position long-term to really get in on that. And so I think Giordano becomes, in the next group of players that they're highly interested in. I don't see them getting two defensemen, which I think is what Jigme's pointing to there. I think if it's Giordano, it's just Giordano. If it ends up being Jacob Middleton, Colin DeHaan, I think it's one of those players, and then trading Dermott out and getting, a fourth line type of player to give them a different mix down there. And so I think that's how it shakes down. I'd be surprised if they got a goaltender because of the marketplace. And so that's kind of where I see the Leafs at this point in time. I think they've left a lot of different options open, and, we'll consider a variety of things. But, as we're getting to the kind of down to the wire here, I do think it's just going to be one depth defenseman and a depth forward that they're adding, come Monday.
Going to add one last one here from Finn G. What do Josh Norris, who's actually having a really good year, and Alex Formanton's next contracts look like this summer? Both of them are restricted free agents.
I appreciate the question. I've got no idea. I'm being honest.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm so deep in the weeds on the trade deadline stuff. Any of my thoughts on the Senators has been about their UFAs, what's going to happen with Nick Paul and all that. I mean, I think the beauty for those guys is they are RFAs. They're not pressing situations for Ottawa until after the deadline or into the summer. And, I don't yet know, but, I do know that the Senators have been cautious about committing too much money to any of their players because they have so many RFA deals coming, whether it's Stützle beyond these guys, Norris, Formanton. I think that's a small element of what's going on with Nick Paul is they want to hold the line with any money they're giving out the next few years because they don't want to be boxed in when it comes time to signing some of those guys to bigger deals.
Yeah. You were not kidding, by the way. There are over 200 responses, almost 300 responses to your call out for questions on Ask CJ. And we're really happy that this segment has blown up the way that it has. And we have the luxury of all these choices we can get to every week. So we appreciate you all sending in questions on Twitter or on Discord for us to answer for this podcast, or for CJ just to answer for the Inside the NHL column that he does for the Toronto Star as part of him being with North Star Bets and North Star Gaming. So thank you for sending in these questions for Ask CJ.
Yeah, the listeners are awesome. I love that. Some of the funny ones are great too. Like someone asked me if I like Boston Pizza or Kelly's Home Like Inn in Coburg better. And for the answer, I'm going with Kelly's old traditional bar in downtown Coburg. Good spot to have a beer if you're ever there.
There's one question that I'm sure we're going to get to on Tuesday. Maybe we'll have an update. Maybe we won't have an update. But shout out Leafy TV one time, who, without fail, always asks us the question about what Jeff Carter's middle name is. I think at one point she had a question where she was like, hey, I'm literally in a hostage situation and I can only get out if you tell me what his middle name is.
Oh man.
Oh man. I can't believe this is such a mystery. And I find it so ridiculous. It has taken us this long.
I hate to say it. I almost never want to say it because it's so much fun. And like having it is just like an inside joke for the hardcore pod listeners.
Oh man.
What are we going to focus on once we get that answer? You know, it's sort of like sometimes when you have a dream and you realize that dream, like it's hard to have the next dream. So,
I mean, like it could be like a season 1, like arc where like you follow the season of the podcast and at the very end as a payoff, you get something, but then you kind of create something else for the people who watch to look forward to for next season. So maybe that's something else. Maybe we try to figure out someone else's middle name or some other weird. Actually, you know what? You can reveal. Maybe you know what? I have this idea. So we gotta reveal the middle name of Jeff Carter's middle name. But before it's all said and done, you have to go in on that trade you teased a couple episodes ago that was supposed to be this big blockbuster one that you're not going to reveal only because some of
I don't think the world's ready for it yet. Honestly,
it's not ready. I get it, but like that's something to look forward to in the distance. But as a teaser, you can let go the middle name. But by the way, that you're making it seem as if you know the name now.
I know the name.
Okay, so I
feel like I shouldn't say it yet, and I'm not trying to be a jerk. Okay. It's just I feel like sometimes it's the journey, but it's not the destination.
Okay, all right, cool, all right. So you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't have a trade break, but we know Jeff Carter's middle name. Will you all get to know it? Okay, well, look, we're partners in this.
I know, but I can't share with you because I just can't. This is under.
You're not even going to tell me? Come on.
This is under lock and key, bud.
What? You put this in the trust tree? We've been doing this podcast for like over 50 episodes. Like, come on, dog. I'll give you some.
When you're older, my friend. When you're ready.
My birthday's in a month.
I know what I'm getting you all of a sudden.
Damn it. Okay. All right. We'll figure that out. Jesus, man. Anyway. This has been a special Sunday edition of the Chris Johnston Show.
That's the episode, brother.
That is a what episode? Sorry, I spoke over you.
Beefy, heavy.
It is very beefy. Yes, it was low.
Best 30-minute pod in hockey right here.
Yeah, man.
As we move into hour 2 of trade talk.
Look, if the SDP can get away with doing a 2-hour show, I don't see any reason why we can't flirt with 2 hours. But maybe we shouldn't do that regularly, but we appreciate everyone who listened to the podcast in its entirety, whether on YouTube, whether on any other podcast provider. If you are listening through the Athletics app, thank you for that because you are able to listen to the podcast ad-free. We will not be back on Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday with a post-trade deadline show. And again, we'll have another Ask CJ segment, but the questions will be a lot more light and a lot more fun. A place where someone could ask, hey, what's Jeff Carter's middle name? Only for CJ to be like, I'm not going to tell you until you're older. But anyway, I'm not going to be bitter at all. Yeah, subscribe to the SDPN YouTube page as well. Subscribe to the SDPN Discord channel. Go to sdpn.ca and you can check out the Discord page from there. I hope there's more trades for you on Monday, my man, because there's a lot that happened this weekend. But by the sounds of things, there's still a lot of pieces available for everyone else.
Well, if you need me before Tuesday, I'll be on this thing. So you know where to find me.
Yeah, I'm just going to be pestering you. Like, tell me his damn name. For CJ, I'm Julian saying so long, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.